Welcome back to Unmasked by Neisha, a series created to bring clarity, language, and understanding to the layers of narcissistic abuse through a survivor's lens. Been here since the beginning. Thank you for staying. In the last episode, I shared how this story didn't start as abuse, it started as connection. How confusing moments replaced safety long before I had language for what was happening. We talked about why narcissistic abuse is so hard to recognize in real time and why intelligent, self-aware people still get pulled into the dynamics. That episode was about how I didn't see it coming, not because I was careless, but because the conditioning happens quietly. Today, we're going to go deeper into what happens next. This is where it stops being about a relationship and starts becoming psychological and in many ways spiritual warfare. We're going to talk about identity erosion, confusion, and why the damage doesn't feel external, it feels internal. If any part of the last episode resonated with you, this one will help you understand why. I've come to believe that narcissism represents one of the most refined forms of psychological warfare and, at its core, spiritual warfare. Scripture tells us that Lucifer's fall was not rooted in weakness, but in pride. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. He didn't want power to serve. He wanted elevation without submission. And where's the highest point of man? His mind. This is where narcissistic abuse aims. Because if you destabilize the mind, you distort identity. If you distort identity, you interrupt discernment. And once discernment is compromised, control becomes possible. This is where spiritual warfare crosses into lived experience. Over time, narcissistic abuse erodes your sense of self, not through one dramatic event, but through a slow, subtle dismantling of your internal world. Once the cycle begins, the narcissist distorts your reality through gaslighting, reframing your reactions as overreactions, your needs as burdens, and your intuition as paranoia. Layer in intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable mix of cruelty followed by affection, and the nervous system becomes conditioned to associate relief with the person causing the harm. Add love bombing, projection, blame shifting, and emotional withdrawal, and the relationship becomes a psychological maze where you lose sight of where you end and they begin. This process is so gradual that most survivors do not recognize it as it's happening. The erosion is incremental, calibrated, and often disguised as intimacy or conflict resolution. That is why the dissolution of identity feels internal rather than imposed, because the abuse slips in quietly, reorganizing your self-concept one distorted interaction at a time. So when I say the dissolution of identity feels internal rather than imposed, this is what I mean. You don't realize someone is doing this to you. You believe you are the one changing, becoming more confused, insecure, emotional, or too sensitive. The abuse unfolds so slowly and subtly that instead of recognizing manipulation, you interpret the changes as personal flaws. And that's what makes it so destabilizing. The harm doesn't feel external. It feels like it's coming from inside of you. And this dynamic mirrors the classic frog in warm water analogy. And not just metaphorically, it aligns with how narcissistic abuse works neurologically, emotionally, and psychologically. A frog placed in boiling water will jump out immediately. A frog placed in warm water that heats gradually will adjust and adjust until it doesn't realize it's in danger. And narcissistic abuse works the same way. It doesn't begin at a boil. It starts warm, comforting, intense, even intoxicating. Then, slowly and incrementally, the temperature rises. So let's map this out to the analogy. So love bombing is the warm water at the beginning. It's comforting and disarming. Gaslighting warms the water by making you doubt your perceptions. Intermittent reinforcement raises the temperature unpredictably, keeping you emotionally suspended. Projection and blame shifting intensify the heat as you internalize their behavior as your fault. Emotional withdrawal marks the boiling point, when you're desperate for relief but don't yet see the danger. And identity erosion is the frog that never jumped, because the change was too gradual to notice, because the change happens in small degrees. The survivor adapts, rationalizes, normalizes, self-blames, loses perspective, stays. Not because they're weak, but because the environment changed slowly enough to keep the danger hidden. So survivors don't choose this dynamic. They don't see it coming, and they don't stay because they're weak. They stay because they were conditioned. The frog doesn't choose to boil. It adapts. Survivors don't choose abuse. They adapt to it. And that's why survivors often say, I don't know when I lost myself. I just woke up one day and didn't recognize who I'd become. That moment for me was when I came to the place of radical acceptance. Everything changed. You know the saying, once you see the monster, you can't unsee it. And I definitely saw it when I revisited him for the last time. And once I saw it, like really saw it, I went back and started replaying everything in my mind, trying to understand what I had missed. Did I hear it wrong? Did I misunderstand? And then something clicked. The turning point came when I finally saw the pattern. When I replayed the relationship in slow motion and stayed anchored in the truth, I began naming the behaviors, and suddenly everything came into focus. My first thought was, wow, and my second was deeper. This is how people get pulled into cults, because I could see it then. Every layer of manipulation, every subtle shift, every quiet erosion, not loud, not dramatic, just consistent. Clarity didn't come from confrontation, it came from recognition, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And here's the internal damage I didn't see. What hit me just as hard was realizing how unaware I had been of the internal damage he caused, how quietly he rewired my confidence into self-doubt. A friend noticed it before I did. I had started talking in circles. I couldn't make decisions. I sounded unsure in ways that were unfamiliar. She stopped me and said, "What's this? This is new." And I remember answering honestly, "I don't know." Looking back, I can see it clearly now. That confusion wasn't burnout. It was the residue of abuse. Even years later, I didn't realize my body was still living in a fawn response. The freeze and appease state of trauma creates to survive. I had stopped doing many of the things I loved. He used to mock me and say, "You just think you're some kind of celebrity." But that wasn't arrogance. That was confidence. And the narcissist worked quietly to dismantle it. This experience taught me how easy it is to start shrinking, to dim yourself in small, obedient ways just to feel safe. Those urges didn't disappear overnight, but as I healed, they lost their authority. There are still moments when the pull to shrink shows up, but it no longer gets to decide who I am. And maybe that's what healing actually is. Not the absence of old feelings, but the conscious decision not to live by them anymore. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, the danger rarely looks dangerous. The traits hide in plain sight, and the abuse goes unnamed. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't know how deep it ran. I walked away and spent 2 years thinking I was fine until radical acceptance stripped the illusion away. The moment I finally saw the monster for what he was and what he had done to me, everything changed. And only by seeing the behavior accurately could I begin to understand the full psychological impact of what I had survived. And I'm going to end here for today. There's so many layers to the abuse and healing. I don't want to overwhelm you. And if any part of this resonates with you, you're not alone and you're not imagining it. Like, follow, and share if this helped put words to something you've lived. And if there's something you want me to talk about next, let me know. This space is for all of us.